Hello and welcome to MTG Burgeoning, your channel for all things magic. In this video, we are going to add the final 20 creature cards with converted mana costs of 5 into our Momir Vig Cube. Greetings and salutations to the MTGBC. You are the MTG Burgeoning community. Welcome back to another installment of our soon-to-be-ending Momir Vig Cube Series. If you are unfamiliar with the goals or purpose of the series, you can search in the description below for a link to MTG Burgeoning's introduction to the Momir Vig Cube. And while you're down there in the description, you can also click the link to Cube Cobra, where you can see the entire contents of the cube as it stands right now. So here we go. For today, it's the last 20 creature cards with mana values of 5. We start things off with a mono black human warrior. It is Titan Hunter. It's a 4/5, and at the beginning of each player's end step, if no creatures died this turn, Titan Hunter deals 4 damage to that player. Remember, in Momir Vig, each player begins the game with 24 life. And as an additional bonus for us, we can pay 1 and a black mana to sacrifice a creature, and if we do, we gain 4 life instead of having the 4 damage dealt to us by our own creature. With enough sacrificial fodder on our side of the battlefield, it'll really be a problem for our opponents deciding whether or not to send a creature into combat, hoping that it dies, and even if it doesn't die, that opponent may still take 4 points of damage at the beginning of their end step. Titan Hunter, very sneaky, powerful card coming out of the 5 spot. Creature number 2 was a colorless edition. Here we have Titanium Golem, a 3/3 golem that we can pay 1 and 1 white mana, and if we do, it gains first strike until end of turn. Similar to Titan Hunter, we need that colored mana in order to activate its abilities, in order to activate these creatures' abilities, so make sure you diversify that basic land library. We're going back to mono black, and this time it's Tivash, Gloom Summoner. It's a 4/4 human warlock with lifelink. Lifelink is such a powerful mechanic in this format because with combat being the primary path to victory, any way in which to drain one opponent and gain life on the back end is going to be very, very valuable. So at the beginning of our end step here, when it comes to Tivash, if we gained life this turn, we may pay X life, where X is the amount of life we gained. And if we do, we create an XX black demon creature token with flying. The flying is so powerful. The evasion is such a big deal in Momir Vig. If we are fortunate enough to have some other peripheral life gain effects on our side of the battlefield, creatures that can create creatures are very, very powerful in this format. Next up in a mono red edition, we have Torchling. It's a 3/3 shapeshifter with 5 different activated abilities, 3 of which require red mana, so once again, make sure you diversify that basic land library. For 1 red mana, we can untap Torchling. For 1 red mana, target creature blocking Torchling this turn target creature must block Torchling this turn if able. And for another red mana, we can change the target of spell that targets only Torchling. The 3rd ability is useless here in Momir Vig because the only spells are coming from the Momir Vig Cube. They're all creatures all the time. There are no instants or sorceries in this format. For 1 generic mana, Torchling gets +1/-1, and for another generic mana, Torchling gets -1 and +1. So 4 out of the 5 abilities are very, very relevant in this format. Torchling could be a sneaky good play coming out of the 5 spot. Next up, we're going mono white here with Trapjaw Tyrant. This Rivals of Ixalan Dinosaur is a 5/5, and whenever it is dealt damage through its Enrage mechanic, we exile target creature an opponent controls until Trapjaw Tyrant leaves the battlefield. What's so powerful about this card is that every creature that's summoned from the Momir Vig Cube is a token copy of the creature. So when a token leaves the battlefield, it ceases to exist. So for the purposes of this format, Trapjaw Tyrant simply exiles target creature whenever it is dealt damage. So we're going to send a 5/5 into combat, or leave it back as a blocker, and just dare one of our opponents to enrage our dinosaur. Next up, creature number 6 is a mono blue edition. It is Vesuvan Shapeshifter. It's a 0/0 shapeshifter. All the way on the bottom of this card, it has a morph ability, which is meaningless here in Momir Vig. Remember, every creature that's summoned from the cube is done so randomly, and morphing it into play is not possible. However, when Vesuvan Shapeshifter comes into play, we may choose another creature in play, and if we do, until Vesuvan Shapeshifter is turned face down, it becomes a copy of that creature and gains, at the beginning of our upkeep, we may turn this creature face down. So we do have a built-in face down ability here, which will allow us to flip it back up for its morph cost of 1 and a blue. So although we can't pay the traditional 3 colorless mana to cast Vesuvan Shapeshifter for its morph ability, it's at the beginning of our upkeep trigger allows us to turn it face down and then turn it back up for 1 and a blue for it to become a copy of another creature. Just make sure you have those islands in the basic land library, because it is going to require blue mana to activate. Our next creature is our first multicolored edition, and here we have Vona, Butcher of Magon. Magon? Yeah, we'll go with Magon. Butcher of Magon. It's a 4/4 Vampire Knight. It has Vigilance, and it has that lifelink. And a very powerful ability. It's going to be a bit costly. We're going to tap Vona here, pay 7 life to destroy target non-land permanent. This is an ability we can only activate during our turn. As we get deeper and deeper into a game of Momir Vig, the battlefield is going to start to become teeming with creatures that are going to deal more damage than 7 if they connect in combat. So turning Vona sideways and paying that 7 life, it may be worth it on the back end. If we're preventing life loss, that's a lot more than that. All right, next up, and this creature is going to be extremely powerful if we have the beneficial luck, I guess we'll say, of summoning a copy of it to our side of the battlefield. It is Vulturous Zombie. It's a 3/3 plant zombie with flying, so the evasion is built in. Now, 3/3 isn't huge, but I promise you this creature can get out of control in a hurry. Whenever a card is put into an opponent's graveyard from anywhere, we put a +1/+1 counter on Vulturous Zombie. Remember, whenever a player summons a creature from the Momir Vig Cube, they must discard a card from their hand. Those cards are lands, which are the only cards that are in our library. They're all basic lands. So with Vulturous Zombie on our side of the battlefield, each time an opponent summons a creature from the cube, Vulturous Zombie gets that +1/+1 counter and becomes a bigger and bigger threat, especially with that wonderful evasion of flying. Next up, we're going back to another colorless creature. This time it's Walker of the Wastes. It's a 4/4 Eldrazi with Trample, and it gets +1/+1 for each land we control named Wastes. Remember, Wastes is a basic land, and they can be put into the basic land library. It's a basic land as much as an island, plains, swamp, forest, and mountain. They're all basic lands, and if you've got some on your side of the battlefield, then this 4/4 with Trample is going to be a bit bigger. All right, reaching the halfway point of this video, we're going mono green with this creature, the first one of the video, and it is Whisperwood Elemental. It's a 4/4 elemental. At the beginning of our end step, we manifest the top card of our library. Now, to manifest a card, we put the top card of our library onto the battlefield face down as a 2/2 creature. We can turn it up anytime for its mana cost if it's a creature card. But in this format, it won't be a creature card because the only cards in our library are basic lands. We can sacrifice Whisperwood Elemental, and until end of turn, face up non-token creatures we control gain, when this creature dies, manifest the top card of your library. So this could help us to quickly rebuild our side of the battlefield if one of our opponents, or if it's us by accident, of course, because remember, every creature that's summoned from the cube is done so randomly. This can help us to rebuild our board very, very quickly if a creature comes down with an enter the battlefield trigger that wipes the board, or comes down with an activated ability that our opponents could wipe out our board whenever they want. So having Whisperwood Elemental could be a very sneaky, sneaky good card for the purposes of rebuilding our shattered battlefield. All right, starting the second half of our creatures here, we have another colorless edition. It is Wicker Warcrawler. It's a 6/6 scarecrow. Whenever it attacks or blocks, we put a -1/-1 counter on it at the end of combat. So a 6/6 for 5 is pretty good, but each time it participates in combat, it gets a little bit smaller. We're going back to mono red here, and this time we have Wildfire Cerberus. It's a 4/3 hound with the monstrosity mechanic. This monstrosity cost is going to cost us 5 and 2 red mana, and when we pay it, we put 1/+1/+1 counter on Wildfire Cerberus. How about we'll just say on this hound? So when this hound becomes monstrous, it deals 2 damage to each opponent and each creature our opponents control. So let's just go back to what we were talking about earlier with Whisperwood Elemental. If we have that creature on our side of the battlefield, and suddenly one of our opponents puts this hound on their side of the battlefield, and then later in the game makes it monstrous, we could lose some number of creatures. Sacrificing the Whisperwood Elemental could be a very good way to rebuild the board. If we get Wildfire Cerberus on our side of the battlefield, this could be a potential game ender, particularly if the first round of creatures that were summoned to our opponent's sides of the battlefield were very small in their toughness. All right. Oh, and also make sure you've got those mountains in your basic land library, because it's going to cost you 2 red mana to make that hound monstrous. All right, next up, mono blue, we have Willbreaker, a 2/3 human wizard. Whenever a creature an opponent controls becomes a target of a spell or ability we control. Again, there are no instants or sorceries here in Momir Vig, so this is going to be errated to just say, whenever a creature an opponent controls becomes the target of an ability we control, we gain control of that creature for as long as we control Willbreaker. So as long as we can have some creature on our side of the battlefield that can activate, or that can target one of our opponent's creatures with either a triggered or an activated ability, and if we've got Willbreaker too, we're going to gain control of that creature for as long as we keep Willbreaker on our side of the battlefield. All right, next up, we're going mono green, back to the days of Avacyn Restored. It is Wolfir Silverheart, a 4/4 wolf warrior with the Soul Bond mechanic. So the Soul Bond mechanic, if you're unfamiliar with that when Wolfir here comes into play, we may pair it with another unpaired creature when it enters a battlefield, or when a different creature enters a battlefield if Wolfir is already not paired. You got that? So Wolfir can come into play. We can pair it with a creature, or it can come into play and not be paired, and then we can pair another creature that comes into play with Wolfir. Everyone get that? All right, very good. So when we have Wolfir paired with another creature, or when we have another creature paired with Wolfir, each creature is going to get +4/+4. So Wolfir will be an 8/8, and the other creature paired with it is going to get +4/+4. Those could be a couple of monsters. If it's me and I'm summoning Wolfir on turn 5, I'm probably having that bad boy come into play unpaired, and then when my 6 spot comes in, depending on what it is, maybe that creature pairs up with Wolfir, we send Wolfir into combat with an 8/8, and the other creature, hopefully for the investment of 6 mana, is going to be even bigger. All right, next up, staying in mono green as we reach the 3/4 mark of this video, it is Woodborn Behemoth. Here we have a 4/4 elemental that gets +4/+4 in trample as long as we control 8 or more lands. A feat that is not unreasonable to achieve here in Momir Vig. Once we put that 8th land onto our side of the battlefield, we've got an 8/8 trampler for just the investment of 5 mana. All right, next up we have a mono white creature, and this time we're going to talk about some removal. It's World Queller, a 4/4 avatar that at the beginning of our upkeep we may choose a card type. If we do, each player sacrifices a permanent of that type. For the purposes of our Momir Vig Cube here, that most likely is going to be creature or land. There could be the stray artifact, maybe there's a treasure token or a clue token or a rock token floating around, but more often than not, if we're making a choice, we're picking creature or we're picking land. We're going back to mono red, and here we have Wrecking Ogre, a 3/3 Ogre Warrior with double strike. That is all. It also has the Blood Rush mechanic, but this creature will never be in our hand in Momir Vig because, let's face it, as we've already stated, it's randomly summoned from the Momir Vig Cube. So for 5 mana, we're getting a 3/3 with double strike. All right, next up, we're going back to Avacyn Restored for another mono-green creature. This time it's U-Spirit, a 3/3 Spirit Treefolk that gets +X/+X until end of turn, where X is its power if we pay its activation cost of 2 and 2 green mana. And note that we do not have to tap U-Spirit to do this, so we could conceivably activate this ability more than once during a turn. Also note, it's going to cost 2 green mana to activate it, and if you want to activate it more than once, well then you better make sure you've got flush mountains on your side of the battlefield. We're down to the last 2 creatures of this video of the 5 mana tier, and we're going to start to end things with creature number 19. It is mono red. It is Zealous Conscripts, a 3/3 human warrior with haste. When it enters the battlefield, we gain control of target permanent until end of turn. Untap that permanent, it gains haste until end of turn. More likely than not, this is going to come into play. It's going to temporarily borrow one of our opponent's creatures. We get to untap it, it gains haste, and then we're going to send it in combat. Maybe it's going to be a utility creature that we need to have die, or maybe it's just going to be a big beater that we're looking to have one of our opponent's life totals tick down southward. All right, here we go. Creature number 20 of this video and creature number 200 for the 5 mana tier. It is multicolored. It is Zerta Ancient. We have a 7/5 beast, and whenever a player taps a land for mana, that player adds 1 mana to their mana pool of any type that land produced. The worst part about this is that every single opponent after us is going to be able to double their mana before we get a chance to do so. That's going to be tough, and it helps to highlight one of the themes that we've woven into this Momir Vig Cube over the span of dozens and dozens of videos, is that not every creature is uber powerful or uber useful. All right, there you have it, MTGBC. We have closed out another tier, 200 creatures with mana values of 5. Let me know in the comment section below, which are your favorites? This is MTG Burgeoning, your channel for all things magic.